But I just want to get up here quickly and introduce our moderator for our first panel, aptly titled, What Happened? Mary Kissel is a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. She hosts Opinion Journal every weekday at 1 p.m., Monday through Friday. Ms. Kissel joined the Journal through their Hong Kong office in 2004. Beforehand, had a career at Goldman Sachs. So you're half beloved on this campus, if not. And got to start as a master's degree in international affairs from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. But I don't want to ramble on anymore. I guess we'll get started. Ms. Kissel.
Thanks, Harry. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the annual Buckley Conference. You are really in for a treat today, and I just want to thank the student hosts and our panelists for making the trip here. We do have really the question to start off. What happened to the conservatives, to the country? What has happened to Ted Cruz? There are many questions about what has happened. But before we start, I'd like to introduce our panelists in no particular order. I'm sure you already know who they are, so I will be brief. Start with Michael Barone. He's the senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner. He is an American Enterprise Institute resident fellow, a Fox News Channel contributor, the co-author of the Almanac of American Politics, the author of a very important book, Our Country. If you haven't read it, you should. The New Americans, Hard America, Soft America, and many more. Jonah Goldberg is contributing editor to National Review Online, also an American Enterprise Institute fellow. He's a columnist for the LA Times, a member of the USA Today Board of Contributors, also a Fox News contributor and an author of, and I quote, "The Tyranny of Cliches and Liberal Fascism." And last but not least, Craig Shirley. He too is an author of Reagan's Revolution and Rendezvous with Destiny. He's been involved in American politics and government for almost 3 decades. The Reagan campaign, the Reagan administration. He knows where all the bodies are buried inside the Beltway. So we're going to kick it off with opening statements from each of these gentlemen. I'll open with a quick question, and then we will do questions from the mics, not statements, but questions. And if you don't, I will mercilessly cut you off. So with that, we'll start in alphabetical order. Michael, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And you gave a plug to my 1990 book, Our Country, The Shaping of America, from Roosevelt to Reagan. I am not sure whether I am pleased or displeased to tell you that the last time I looked on Amazon, a copy was available for 11 cents. This book has had great influence in keeping various doors open.
Can't win them all, Michael, can't win them all.
It's that way. You mentioned the name of Ted Cruz, somebody many people have not heard of a few years ago, although I've known Ted for about 10 years, and he's, I think he's made a point of keeping in touch with national conservatives through his years in Texas. He's a very gifted lawyer and was certainly a better law student at Harvard than I was here at Yale. But I think that his legal training may have left him a little astray on this. He's a constitutional lawyer. He's an advocate. He knows that James Madison set up a system in which the president runs the government, the Congress funds the government, and so he said, well, let's link a renewal of this, quote, continuing resolution, the bill that authorizes the government to spend money, with a bill defunding Obamacare. And I remember I was with him when he was making a pitch for this earlier in July at Colorado Christian University Conference in Denver. And he got a lot of notice around there. I think that basically as a tactic, this was probably fundamentally wrong. I put on my old hat as a pollster. I worked for Peter Hart in the polling business in the 1970s, and so I'm a recovering pollster. And defund was about 69% negative. If you use the word delay Obamacare, interestingly, it was about 69% positive response from the public. So it seemed obviously, if you were going to make a ploy of this sort, which you knew you were going to lose because the Democratic Senate and the Democratic President were never going to accept it, then I think it would have been wiser to be on more popular ground. Eventually, the House did pass a deploy thing. But I think that Cruz, who's so good at constitutional law, may not be as well acquainted with how programs work on the ground as many politicians and many public policy analysts are. At least as I understand it. His argument was, well, once people get hooked on this subsidy, they'll never vote to give it up. They'll always keep it there. As I understand the way Obamacare is supposed to work, it doesn't look like a subsidy. And as somebody who is currently on Medicare, if you're a Medicare recipient, actually it doesn't look like a subsidy to you at all. Social Security, old age insurance, you get a check a third of every month, or it's direct deposited to your account. That looks like a subsidy, and of course the the argument for the program is you've earned this by paying taxes on your earnings during your working years. But it looks like you're getting money from the government. Disability insurance looks like a subsidy. You get money coming in. With Medicare, every 3 months you get a Medigap insurance thing asking you to send in a check for $1,300 or something like that if you're a high-income person, and you're beginning to say, I'm not sure I'm getting subsidized. Obamacare, as I understand it, has a provision that if you go on these exchanges and you ever get through, these young people are going to see, they want to give you your discount before they show you the whole sticker price, because they're afraid if they show these young people who are subject to discounts that are eligible for them, the whole sticker price, they'll immediately say, nix, I'm going to play solitaire on this computer and get out of this program, not interested in it anymore until they see. So they're actually disguising the subsidies. It's not, and a subsidy that, reduces your tax bill later or is refunded for you in the tax 14 months later doesn't look exactly like a subsidy. I also think that, and here I would criticize my fellow graduate of Cranbrook School, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, where we learned a lot about the downtrodden, that Mitt Romney, the 47%, this is Cruz's assumption here, is that once somebody's getting some money from the government, they're going to selfishly vote it forever. And I think that's unfair to Americans generally. I think that Americans do not invariably just vote for their own short-term economic interest or their cash into their checking account. Many of us are worried about the high degree of disability insurance usage. The state with the highest disability insurance rate is West Virginia, and it voted 62% for Mitt Romney and 35% for Barack Obama. They vote on other bases. People vote on other bases than pure economic interest. Park Avenue is rich and votes for the Democrats who promise to raise their tax rates. West Virginia is poor and votes for Republicans who seem to threaten, maybe depicted as threatening entitlements. So I think that this was a kind of misbegotten crusade that was reflective, nevertheless, of a widespread feeling out there among many conservatives, and listen to talk radio if you don't know about it, that want to see elected members of Congress get up and stand on their chairs and yell, hell no. And that's what we saw. I think that Republicans have probably not taken huge, enormous damage on this. But I think that they had some opportunity cost here. It obscured, at least somewhat, the Obamacare glitches in the rollout. And I'm seeing increasing evidence that this thing could conceivably implode. And I think this has interesting implications for voters in the long run. One of the strengths of Barack Obama has been his strength among younger voters. Among 18 to 29s, he won 66-32 in 2008, 60-37 in 2012. This is a generation that lives on computers. This is a generation that thinks Obama is cool. This is a generation that thinks computer works are cool. What is this generation going to think when it keeps getting 404 error messages from the cool president's cool program? it may draw the conclusion that public sector programs that are supposed to help you are basically run in an incompetent manner, and that it would be foolish to conduct your life dependent upon them and supporting people that just promise you more 404 programs. So let me just conclude by saying something about demographics and shamelessly plugging my new book, Shaping Our Nation, How America, Surges of Migration Transformed America and Its Politics. I talk about surges of migration from the Scots-Irish in the 18th century to the more recent ones. And one of the surges has been movement from high-tax, high-housing cost states to low-tax, low-housing cost states. So let me just leave you with the following census figures, since I gather that there are probably some people in the audience that don't follow census data as closely as I do. Comparing 1970 populations in 2007. New York State, 1970, 18 million. New York State, 2010, 19 million. Almost no growth in 40 years. Texas, 1970, 11 million. Texas, 2010, 25 million. There are some Americans, surges of migration, that are telling us something about the trends of opinion in this country. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Well, we know now what happened to Ted Cruz. What has happened to the party? Jonah?
Thank you very much. First of all, I am always delighted to come speak to college campuses that wouldn't accept me as a student, which is to say most college campuses, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, so I mean, what happened is a fairly open question. I think one good place to start is the question of why, people spent a lot of time asking why Mitt Romney lost. And there are a lot of good reasons for it. I'm not going to do all the Monday morning quarterbacking now, but among them was that he ran as if that was his race to lose rather than his race to win. And he ran as if he was 4 points ahead rather than ran like he was 4 points behind, and I think that showed. I think he had an authentic inauthenticity problem. And what I mean by that is he's sort of like an alligator. Ever see an alligator? When your friend points out an alligator to you for the first time, you're like, dude, there's no way that's a real alligator. And then you get close to it, and all of a sudden it moves, and you go, whoa! And you realize alligators just look fake. Mitt Romney looks like the picture that comes with the frame. And he's an honorable man, he's a decent man, he would have been a better president, I was hoping he would win, he had a much better skill set. There would be fewer 404 errors under a Romney administration, let's put it that way. But at the same time, in a culture that increasingly wants authenticity, the feeling of authenticity, from at least from politicians who can fake authenticity, Mitt Romney was very poorly equipped to deal with the American people. And Michael knows these numbers and basically all other numbers better than I do. But there was that exit poll that asked 4 questions about Mitt Romney, or about the presidential race, and Romney had a sizable victory in 3 out of 4 of them. Better commander-in-chief, better for the economy, that kind of thing. And he lost on only 1, which was cares about people like me, and lost something like 78-12 or something. I mean, it was an unbelievable rout. And that is a real problem in our culture. And personally, I don't think it's any way to pick a president, but since that's the political reality, picking people like Mitt Romney may be a problem. We talked about Ted Cruz a moment ago. I think I agree with basically everything that Michael said about Ted Cruz, but I think he sort of symbolizes in a certain way one of the problems that the conservative movement has right now. The conservative movement, most of the problems it has are problems of success. We have better media infrastructure than we ever had before. We have better institutions outside of the universities than we ever had before. The problem that comes with that is that you can now, for a lot of conservatives and a lot of conservative politicians, you can spend your entire career only talking to audiences that already agree with you. And when I listen to Ted Cruz go around saying the American people have been going around the country talking to the American people. They don't like Obamacare and all that. He's talking about going and talking to the Americans for Prosperity meeting in El Paso, Texas. And then he comes to report back that they're against Obamacare. You know, this just in. Who is shocked by this news? This may be apocryphal, but I've been told that Richard Nixon was once asked whether he believed in overpopulation, whether there was the population bomb thesis was true. And he said, deadpan, of course I think it's true. I mean, everywhere I go, I see huge crowds. And maybe that's because you're president of the United States, you know, maybe. Maybe it's because you just got back from China. But the point is I am utterly unsurprised that wherever Ted Cruz goes, he meets people who hate Obamacare, because he only goes to places where people hate Obamacare. And that's not to say Obamacare is popular, but there is, and the media landscape is so changed, I think mostly for the better. I talk to a lot of journalism students a lot, and the thing I always tell them that this is by far the most exciting, interesting, open field moment to be in American journalism probably in the last 100 years. There's only one problem with it. We don't know how to get paid for it. But we'll figure that part out. But you know, the thing is, so I think the media climate is generally a good thing, but as a conservative, I believe every good thing comes with a downside. And part of the downside is that in the era of William F. Buckley, in the era of Ronald Reagan, you had, by definition, but just by the structural nature of the information economy, you had to talk to people who disagreed with you, right? If you only had Meet the Press or Firing Line or the New York Times as vehicles, you basically had only audiences where some people in the audience were committed and opposed to you. One of the reasons why Bill Buckley created National Review in the first place was to create a vehicle so we could talk to people who agreed with us and figure out a way to have a coherent message. Now the problem is there are an enormous number of places like National Review, none nearly as good, let's just be honest, but you have this media infrastructure where conservatives can only talk to other conservatives, and it's very difficult for conservatives to talk to non-conservatives. And so you get this feedback loop where a lot of conservatives have lost interest in the art of persuasion. And if politics isn't about persuasion, there's no point of going into politics. If politics isn't about persuasion, it might as well be a Dungeons and Dragons society or some sort of, you know, Klingon wedding, right? Where everyone just plays their role and gets dressed up the way they want to do it, and then they all go home. It's got to be about trying to persuade people. And too much of the conservative movement these days is about exhortation. It is about telling people who already agree with them more about what they want to hear than trying to reach out to new audiences and persuade them to join our side. And I think that is the big problem the conservative movement has. It's one of the problems that the Romney campaign had. It was in a bubble, and it was getting feedback only from the people who already agreed with it. And so I think that one of the things the conservative movement has to figure out how to do is to reach out to new audiences. I go to a lot of college campuses, and I'll just close with this, and I think it's partly the William F. Buckley mission. He did it more than anybody ever could. If you read Overdrive, you'll realize, you know, that's true. But it's an amazing, every college campus I go to, I always point out one thing to these kids. They have somehow convinced themselves that being liberal is rebellious. James Buckley talked about this very well, right? They have convinced themselves that somehow they are really going against the grain, even when their professors are liberal, the administrators are liberal, Hollywood is liberal, the music industry is liberal, the publishing industry is liberal, the mainstream media is liberal, and yet they think they're sticking it to the man by agreeing with them. And when you tell kids this and you try to get in their head and sort of point out to them that they're actually playing exactly the part that they are being asked to play, and that there's a reason why Barack Obama visited college campuses more often than a Red Bull delivery truck, it starts to dawn on them that maybe they shouldn't be the lemmings that most of them are. Thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Jonah. Some interesting comments on structural issues. Michael also addressed that in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today. Maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. Craig?
Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Lauren, for putting this together. It's a wonderful terrific what you've done here. I think the last time I was at Yale was in 1975. I was playing lacrosse for Springfield College, and we were beating Yale. So this is the last time I was here. So, I was so delighted to see Jim Buckley here. Jim wouldn't remember, but the Shirley family in Syracuse was a hotbed of activity for Buckley for Senate in 1970. And my parents were charter members of the Conservative Party of New York with the Buckleys and Kieran and Dan and everybody. They all went to all the Conservative Party conventions, and it was always, very exciting. You wouldn't remember coming. My father was chairman of the Onondaga County Conservative Party, and he used to come to fundraisers there, and Bill did. That was the first time I ever saw a seersucker jacket, which I thought was... One of the things I really, really love about book writing is getting to do these things and meeting people. In my last Reagan book, I interviewed about, I think, 175 people, everybody from President Carter, this is on the 1980 campaign, President Carter, Vice President Mondale, former President Bush, Jim Baker, everybody you can imagine. There were only a handful of people I couldn't interview. One was David Stockman because he was under indictment. Another was Ted Kennedy because he was ailing.
Stockman was since got out of it.
Yeah, he got out of it, but then he was, yeah, right. But his lawyers told me he couldn't talk to anybody. But there was one other person I couldn't talk to, and it was Alice Cooper, the rock star, who was a Reagan supporter in 1980. And I wanted to find out, why would a rock star support Ronald Reagan? To Jonah's point about being rebellious, about that, and that was true rebellion in 1980, was being for Reagan, true youth rebellion. He had contributed to the campaign, so I contacted the office, and they talked to his assistant, said, yes, Alice was a big Reagan supporter, he contributed to the campaign. No, Alice can't do an interview. And I said, why? And the woman said, well, Alice was drunk. And I said, what do you mean Alice was drunk? And she said, Alice was drunk from 1967 to 1983. And I said, you mean all the time? And she said, yeah, pretty much. So, anyway.
Something to aspire to.
Yes. So he didn't remember anything, I think was the point she was driving at.
To be young again.
Yes. Right. That was a long time ago, Michael.
Right.
The question is what happened. And I think to get to what happened, we have to get back to where we were. First, in the late 70s, the state of the party. At this point in time, 3 years out from a presidential campaign, it was 1977 for the Republican Party. In January of 1977, the Republican National Committee actually had to close its offices because it couldn't make its mortgage payments, it couldn't pay its electric bill, they couldn't pay their staffers. 11% of voters under the age of 30 were actually affiliated with the Republican Party. The party didn't even have enough senators to mount a filibuster in the U.S. Senate. The Democrats could ram through everything, and they had almost a 2-to-1 advantage in the House of Representatives. I think at the time there were 13 Republican senators, and even more startling at the time, there was only one state in the country that had Republican control of both the governor's office and the legislature, and that was Kansas. Every other state in the country had either total or near total Democratic control. There were states in the South that didn't even have, I think Mississippi didn't even have an elected Republican official in the state government. So when you put things in perspective, and then 3 years later comes Ronald Reagan and the Revolution and the Senate and House and all those other things. So now go forward with Ronald Reagan to January, when he's leaving office, of January of 1989. His approval rating among all voters is 69%. His approval rating among white voters is 73%. His approval rating among African Americans is 40%. Unemployment was 5.2%. Inflation, the terrible inflation and interest rates of the 80s have been eradicated. They were down to interest, I think, was at 7%. Inflation was below that. Gasoline prices were at historic levels. A Cold War that 10 years ago we had been losing in 1980, by 1989 we're winning. The Republican Party was being led by the oldest man to ever lead a political party, but it was not a party anymore. It had become a movement of cheerful ideas organized around Reagan's philosophy of less government, more freedom. And he was, in fact, the last Republican president who could go onto college campuses without fear of protests or reprisals. The one college campus he didn't go to is Harvard because they refused to give him an honorary degree. The Reagan years were not all sweetness and light. There were lots of problems, Iran-Contra, the personal battles with cancer, the struggles with the Democratic left. But on balance, Reagan's conservatism was a coherent philosophy designed not just for the time, but for the ages. He left his party and his philosophy in better shape than he found them. He did not nationalize social issues, he was ardently pro-life, but really favored just simply turning over Roe and sending it back to the states for adjudication. Of course, gay marriage wasn't an issue. And the only time he really meddled in social issues was on voluntary prayer in school, and that for him was an issue of personal freedom and personal rights and personal privacy. So the state of the Republican Party, and by the way, one other astonishing fact was that in January of 1989, 40% of young Americans are associating with the voters under 30 are associated with the Republican Party. For the first time in anybody's recollection, more young Americans are associated with the Republican Party than with the Democratic Party. So this is the party that he hands over to his successor, George H.W. Bush, who in 1988 runs one of the most vapid, content-less campaigns in American history. A campaign about flag burning and ACLU membership, but really nothing of any substance whatsoever. So the Reagan legacy was in many ways was eviscerated, and we ended up with compassionate, or with kinder and gentler government. And he rejects everything that Reagan has left for him. He turned his back on, just as something that I always thought was interesting was that he turned his back on Lithuania. Now, at the time, Gorbachev is sending in, the Lithuanians are not sending their quota of young men to go into the Soviet army. So Gorbachev sends in Russian troops to impress young Lithuanian men into the Russian army. And several months later, the Nobel Committee, in their infinite wisdom, awarded Gorbachev the Peace Prize. He turned his back on Tiananmen Square. He raised taxes. He basically took the Reagan legacy and cast it asunder. So in many ways, the best thing that happened to Republicanism was Bush losing in 1992, which paved the way for the rise of Gingrich, the 104th Congress, and the true reforms that came in that Congress with welfare reform and capital gains and tax cuts and freedom to farm and all the revolutionary things that Reagan wanted to do, but never had a Congress that he could do, complete control, Capitol Hill that he wanted to do. But Gingrich was able to find and force, I might add, it wasn't Gingrich who in January of 1986 said the era of big government is here. It was Bill Clinton who said in January of 1996 the era of big government is over. That's how much the dynamics had changed because of what Reagan did and then what the movement and Gingrich did thereafter. And of course, then came 2000 with the advent of a compassionate conservatism, which again did, in my opinion, severe damage to the legacy of American conservatism, whether it was No Child Left Behind, whether it was the Wilsonian foreign policy, it was signing McCain-Feingold on issue after issue after issue, Homeland Security. Bush over 8 years utterly eviscerated conservatism, traditional American conservatism. And what you had really, there's a lot of people who make the case that the Tea Party started in opposition to Barack Obama. That's not true. The real origins of the Tea Party started in the opposition to the nomination of Harriet Mier in January of 2006. That's where you saw conservatives break first and openly against the Bush administration, because that was just a bridge too far. John Kennedy once said that sometimes party loyalty asks too much, and George Bush was just asking people, conservatives, too much to support that nomination. I'm going to come to my closing remarks here, but I think that in 2006 is that you saw, as I said, the origins of the Tea Party movement, and what you have today is a Republican Party that is even more severely divided than it was, Senator, Judge, back in the 60s. You had the Goldwater, Rockefeller schism, but now it is not just philosophical, economic. Now it's even cultural, and it's really the only thing that unites the Tea Party movement with the traditional insider Republicans is their aversion to President Obama. But on issue after issue after issue, whether it's TARP or the growth of government or the rights of the states, is that there's a schism that exists there. And I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if anybody remembers the movie The Time Machine, but in the future, the world divides itself between the Eloi and the Morlocks. And the Eloi are the nice people that live on the surface, and the Morlocks are the people who live down underneath the surface and eat all the nice Eloi. And I think that the Republican Party is kind of now separated between the Eloi and the Morlocks. The Morlocks are the establishmentarians who rationalize whatever they need to do to eat and gain power, and the Eloi are the nice, peaceful Tea Party people who basically just want to be left alone. As I said, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, except that I think that having lived this and studied this, is that there are a lot of things that the left has put forward that really help conservatism. What we need is a traditional 21st century version of federalism. You know, the part of the mantra of the left has been diversity. Well, that plays to individuality. We're not the type of nation that we were even when Reagan was president. We've become more balkanized. And as you travel around this country, you realize is that this is now the third most populous nation in the world after only China and India. The 310 million people. It's broad, it's vast, it's diverse. Forget about ideology. Forget about liberalism or conservatism. Just look at it from a sense of practicality. And it's illogical to think that you can run America from one corrupt city by the Potomac River. I'm going to end my comments there, and then I guess we'll go to questions, right?
Okay, great. Thank you, Craig. Okay, well, there are an awful lot of themes here, and I hope that all of you will pick up on the various strands in the Q&A. But I'm hearing from the panel a lot of talk of the way that the structure of the country has changed, whether Jonah's comments about the media or Michael's op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today, but also the fact that the party is splitting. So I thought I'd just direct the first question to you, Michael, since you're looking at me. Okay. And ask you, do you think that this split that Craig just talked about between traditional conservatives and the Tea Party was an inevitable split, or is it a reaction to the move away from these kinds of conservative Reaganite principles that Craig just talked about?
I think I disagree somewhat with what Craig was saying. It seems to me that the divergences on this most recent issue about what you do about the budget and do you want to, what do you threaten to shut the government down on and what measures is more tactical than based on than substantive. I think Craig disagrees, but to me, it seems to me that the Republican Party is pretty united about wanting to get rid of Obamacare. It has a majority in the House of Representatives, but it doesn't have a majority in the Senate and doesn't have the presidency. And James Madison wrote a constitution that said that when the government, the Congress funds the government, the president runs the government, there's dispersed responsibility. I think there is a constitutionally implied duty of consultation, which in this case weighs particularly on the president, because just about everybody has to take a president's phone call, but if the Speaker of the House calls you, you can put him on hold. The president certainly can. And I think we had a lack of leadership on that. So the Republicans had some, tactical decisions to make. And my comments indicated, I would have, with the advantage of hindsight, I think different tactics would have served better. But I think also let's recognize the Republicans had some success in here. The sequester. They don't like the sequester is not a good way to run government. It's a sledgehammer cutting everything by exact formulas. There are professionals in the Office of Management and Budget that can tell you how to get a more rational government, and indeed one consistent with conservative principles if you want, by changing this and that law. But you will find that in each case there is a member of Congress or a committee that doesn't want you to change this or that law because they passed it in the first place and they want it in there. But nonetheless, the sequester, by limiting and reducing domestic discretionary spending, and also by limiting defense spending, is reducing some marginal extent and in an unusual way the size and scope of government. And you know, if you want to read Peter Beinart, the liberal writer, wrote this in the Daily Beast in terms that he made this argument together with a bunch of excoriations of Republicans and conservatives and so forth. But he said, you win. And I think it is one of the things we should expect out of James Madison's design is that we get partial victories for our side, which are, in our view, unsatisfactorily small, and perhaps lessened or perhaps maximized by tactics we disagree on, and we get defeats. We can't, you know, this is not the British Parliament, which actually doesn't even operate the way the theory of the British Parliament suggests. So in that sense, I disagree. Culturally, yeah, my piece in the Wall Street Journal, we used to have universal cultures. Everybody listened to the same radio programs. Everybody went to the same movies. Everybody watched the same TV shows or the same small set that were all aimed at a universal audience. And it is interesting, and I think congruent with what Craig's saying, that Ronald Reagan made his pre-political living in all three universal media to appeal to, which in turn reflected his own personal values that he shared when he was a liberal Democrat and when he was a conservative Republican. Radio, movies, TV. He spoke that universal language, and he spoke that in a way that I think is not available to subsequent politicians, as we are a niche culture. We have these little entertainment niches. We have 105 cable channels on TV. We have some people who are gifted both as political commentators and as entertainers, Rush Limbaugh, Jon Stewart, but they're not aiming at a universal audience the way Will Rogers did in the 1930s through his movies. So it's a different thing, and we can sometimes get lost in our own niche, as Jonah suggests. And we often have difficulty understanding other niches and understanding how we can persuade people. And I think, I hope you've been doing a certain amount of constructive deconstruction on campus, Jonah. So, congrats for that.
Doing what I can.
One more question, then we'll open it up to the mics. Jonah, there are little victories like the sequester, but let's be real. The Republicans are at their lowest in the Gallup poll in many, many, many years. And if you were following the presidential election closely at all and you saw those primary debates of the GOP, let me tell you, it was pretty depressing. What's gone wrong with the Republican Party and this leadership? Why aren't there any serious leaders today on the national stage for the Republicans?
Look, first of all, I think that things, you know, what was it Chesty Puller said when he was surrounded by by the Korean army? He said, "Great, we got him exactly where we want him. We can shoot in any direction we want now." First of all, I think this is the low ebb of things. I think we've pulled the Band-Aid off. I'm glad the shutdown thing is over. I don't think we're going to have another shutdown. I don't think we should necessarily have another shutdown unless the math is better, and someone's going to have to explain to me how it would be. But I think that this whole mess, first of all, has been very good for an important Republican constituency, Republican governors, right? And whether it's Chris Christie or Bobby Jindal or, you know, a bunch of others, you basically, they're in the position to say, God, what a mess. That's not the way I would do it. And it's important to point out, you know, Republicans have huge majorities in many state legislatures. I think we have 30 Republican governorships. The party at the state level did enormously well in 2010 and is still doing well. And there's something about the Beltway mentality that just simply wants to measure things in terms of what's going on in Washington. Personally, I think there should have been an amendment to the Constitution to bar senators from even running for president. And it's always a bad idea. And the only reason we got one in 2008 is because both of them were senators. So we had no choice but to elect one. And At the same time, I think that it has always been difficult for the Speaker of the House to be the leader of the party. I mean, in the 19th century, I guess the Speaker of the House was a more exalted position, but trying to run the country from one branch of Congress is always going to be a problem. And I just want to say one quick point on on Craig Shirley's point, because I just want to get it out before I don't want to be able to. I agree with him entirely that the Tea Party needs to be understood in a significant degree as a delayed Bush backlash. There was a sense in which the Republican base was put up with an enormous amount of stuff that they didn't like under Bush because it was a war president and it would support the commander-in-chief, and the left was so irresponsible in how they attacked Bush. But they didn't like compassionate conservatism. I never liked compassionate conservatism. My last name is Goldberg. I'm an Old Testament kind of guy. I like my conservatism with more smiting and wrath. And so then they were asked to vote for John McCain. They did that, and then they had Barack Obama come in, and they were like, the hell, I'm going to put up with this stuff anymore. And they went bonkers, and justifiably bonkers. And that was a good thing. Where I completely disagree with Craig is this idea that there's basically no ideological congruence between the establishment and the Tea Parties. It's just not true. You pick any three principal issues you want, and it's almost impossible to say the Tea Parties believe in this and the establishment believes in that, whether it's abortion or low taxes or any of these things. The differences, I agree there are differences between the establishment and the Tea Parties. There's always going to be differences between populist insurgents and people in power. And the critique that the Tea Parties have that I think is entirely valid is that the establishment has really screwed us up. And I think that's part of Craig's complaint, and I think it's an accurate one, is that since Reagan left office, or at least since Gingrich sort of lost his mojo, the Republican Party has been astray, and the people on the base don't understand why that has to be. And they're very mad about it. And so it's a question of the disagreement of tactics, of the Tea Parties are much more a stand athwart history and yell stop crowd. But they are not necessarily in fundamental disagreement on philosophies or principle. I've spoken to a dozen Tea Party rallies in the last couple of years, and I can't think, and I'm essentially now an establishment guy, and I can't think of an issue where I disagree with them on principle. On strategy, we do disagree, but to create a movement, there's a mood out there that says we need to purge people over disagreement over tactics, and not disagreement over principles, but disagreements over tactics. And that is the spirit of inquisitions. And I think it is a really bad idea. And it's the thing that Barack Obama wants most to split the Republican Party.
Can I just jump in here real quick? Yeah.
Go ahead, Craig.
I agree with most everything Jonah said. There are a lot of issues, though, that do divide the tarp. And I'm not taking a position. I'm just providing analysis that divide the Tea Party with the traditional Republicans, whether it's Iraq or TARP. There's a whole myriad of issues that divide the Tea Party with the Republican Party. I think that the nomination of Romney was something also that goes to, they felt like that the establishment had rigged the rules, and they certainly did down in the convention, where they changed the rules that prevented, delegates from having more say in who they nominated. So there's a lot of, I think that they feel like that there's a lot of, not just tactical, to Mike's point, not just ideological, but there's also a lot of just cultural differences between the two, and I don't know if they're able to be reconciled unless you get an extraordinarily strong leader who can reconcile the two positions right now.
Great. Okay, we're going to open up the floor to questions. Again, please state your name and the question. No statements, just questions, and we'll keep them short so we can get as many people as possible up to the mic. Yes, sir, on the left.
Question directed to our moderator concerning on the issue, and Mr. Barone may have some electoral and polling information. I wonder whether one of the things that substantially contributed to the loss in 2012 and still hangs over conservatism and Republicans is what some may call the grossly false narrative of the fiscal crisis and its causes. What some folks might call the Elizabeth Warren narrative. There was big, bad, rich people who deregulated the economy,
So the question, sir, is?
So the question is, how much do you think that played into the voters' disaffection of the Republicans in 2012, and how much is that still weighing over us in the background?
Great question. Michael?
Well, I think, you know, a lot of people on the left were chortling after the financial collapse and saying, as the Time magazine cover did, we're all socialists now. And I think they, you know, the Obama Democrats came to office believing that in times of economic distress, that Americans would be more supportive of or amenable to big government. They acted on that supposition with the stimulus package. It was unpopular. They acted on that supposition with Obamacare. It was unpopular. They lost 63 seats in the House of Representatives, more than any party lost since 1946 and 48. So it seems to me, you know, that the lesson that Americans in economic distress will blame capitalism, will embrace socialism and big government. It's a lesson taught by Arthur Schlesinger and the great New Deal historians. As I mentioned, I've tried to teach a somewhat different lesson in my book, which sells for 11 cents. The Obama people clearly didn't pay any attention to it. But, you know, I'm not saying that everybody or the majority of voters embrace the, you know, the theories of my American Enterprise Institute colleague Peter Wallace, and that basically bad government regulation produced this result, this housing price collapse and financial collapse. But I think that it has not discredited market economics as much, nearly as much, as the left assumed and acted on to their danger and detriment.
Wonderful. Next question. Please come to the mic. There's a mic on this side, too. Yes, sir.
Hi, team. I'm Paul Erickson. Here's my question. Is conservatism essentially been liberated from electoral politics? Meaning, as a result of 2012, are we officially post-electoral? In other words, is there any combination of men or women that could be elected to the United States Congress or Senate that could possibly stop the fiscal destruction of the United States? Or is the movement's best result to simply confine ourselves to the bunkers and rebuild the society after the coming crash?
Terrific question. Jonah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I appreciate this commercial for gold. And that's why I buy my gold at, no. The thing that drives me crazy about that commercial is the guy shows where his secret safe is. And it's like, why have a secret wall safe if you're going to have it in the commercial? Anyway, look, one of the great things about the last 5 or 6 years is that for the survivalist type, the conspiracy theorist type, all of those guys, all of their positions have become more reasonable. You know, like, if you're the kind of person who thinks the NSA has been snooping on your email, turns out you're right.
Right, yeah.
If you're the kind of person who said, oh, one day they're just going to devalue the currency, well, you're not so wrong, right? I don't want to discredit all of that. You know, and it kind of reminds me, Irving Kristol was one of my heroes, the father of Bill. Irving and Judge Bork were once watching the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearing. And at some point, Bork just turned off the TV in disgust and said to Irving, it's the end of Western civilization. And Irving took a long drag of a cigarette, pushed himself back from his desk and said, of course it's the end of Western civilization, but that doesn't mean one can't live well. To a more serious response to your question is look, I think that obviously there are serious reasons to be worried. But as Herb Stein's law says, that which that cannot go on forever eventually must stop. And at some point, these bills are going to come due. We kicked the can on this budget crisis and all the rest. But if you look at like people like Rahm Emanuel, who I'm no fan of, you look at people like Jerry Brown, who's I'm certainly no fan of. Some of these guys are actually coming to the grips with the fact that the models that they are operating under are unsustainable, and eventually even liberals have to deal with the laws of math. Now the question is whether they realize it soon enough. Charles Krauthammer likes to say that there's one party that has sort of woken up and realized about the entitlement crisis, and there's another party that hasn't realized it yet. But eventually they're going to have to realize it. And I like to think that they'll realize it before we're all drinking puddle water and fighting over scraps, but maybe they won't. But I think that they will.
We're going a little bit over on this panel, but I'm going to give it another 10 minutes because this is fascinating. Yes, sir.
Well, as a former office holder, the fact that Congress is held in such low regard, the fact that the bills for Obamacare were not read by a single member of Congress, the fact that the Dodd-Frank Act was not read by almost all the members of Congress, where are some thinking Republicans who can win an election, who are citizens and appeal to a broader base?
Back to the leadership issue. Anyone like to raise their hand on this one?
Well,
Craig?
I just want to say this. I've actually met very few members of Congress that I knew could actually read to begin with. As far as reading bills, is that none of them have done it for years. Trying to get a handle on your question here.
What happened to the leadership?
Well,
what happened to the leadership?
Let me go backwards because I've been thinking about this. What Jonah said about throwing people out. First of all, is the post meltdown or post shutdown has been David Frum and people like that have been writing pieces about throwing the Tea Party out of the Republican Party and not the other way around. So I want to get that.
Yeah, but he self-defenestrated himself from the conservative movement quite a while
Right,
ago.
but there have been other people, you have to admit, so other establishmentarians who have been out there saying the Tea Party's a problem, or we need to get rid of the Tea Party, we need to
I don't think
control them.
subtracting your coalition
I
makes it stronger.
absolutely agree, and that's why is that when Reagan was running in 1980, you go to the acceptance speech of the the Republican convention. He talks about a community of shared values, and he makes an open appeal at the Republican convention to Democrats and independents to join the community of shared values, and then he invokes Franklin Roosevelt to 17,000 Republicans, because he was at heart always a recruiter, and I think that the movement and the Tea Party and the Republican Party at heart should always be recruiting people. This base stuff, this is Karl Rove stuff, this came out of 2000, is just that I always was skeptical of it, and a lot of conservatives were always skeptical of just going after the base and not expanding your message out. But one other thing on the shutdown, the meltdown, whatever, is that these things are fluid. They are not taken as singular events. Is that Reagan lost the fight over the Panama Canal treaties, but it set him up to help win the nomination in 1980. It set up Republican senators to win in 78 and 80 against Democratic senators who voted for the Panama Canal. Is that I'm for anything that questions people's devotion to government. I'm for anything that undermines people, the government is the end-all and be-all. And if you want to look at the shutdown in that context, and I say is that maybe it's a battle they lost, but they set the plate to take the argument further, to get people to start thinking about that Washington is not the panacea to what ails them, but instead the solutions have to come from the individual and the states and localities.
Michael,
Well,
did you have a
just
brief
go-
response?
Well, I would say that the gentleman's question points up one of the weaknesses of liberalism, which is that in its current, perhaps senescent stage, which is that it's hard to do good. It's hard to do good well. If you go back and look at the New Deal legislation, a lot of it's, 27 pages. And if you go back and read the history of the New Deal, it turns out that Franklin Roosevelt, Reagan's hero for many years, had a knack for picking really competent people to do tough jobs. And they didn't have to, a whole lot of regulations holding them down in various ways. They built the Pentagon in 18 months, okay? Anybody be able to do that today?
The Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm not sure that the structure would actually bear up for 30 years. The next earthquake that hits, you go sandwich. But look, they have set themselves too difficult a task, quite possibly. Obamacare may be imploding in front of our eyes. If these computer things don't work and we go into an insurance death spiral, you have the possibility of a huge discrediting of big government in a way that, that I think could be hugely consequential. And, you know, at that point, Craig's right that the shutdown or not, or to demand defund or delay, is of marginal importance. Just a couple of numbers to give some encouragement. One of the consequences of the social movements and migrations around the country over the last 40 years is that Democratic votes, especially the Obama Democratic Coalition, tend to be clustered in in central cities, like-minded suburbs, and one hates to say it, university towns. And they're clustered in that area. They carry those districts with 80 or 90%. This helps Democrats in the Electoral College. Bush's 51% of the popular vote gave him 286 electoral votes. Obama's 51% gave him 332. It works the opposite way around in Congress and legislatures, because outside those Democratic clusters, Republican voters are more evenly spread around. So Bush carried 255 congressional districts with his 51%. Obama carried 209. That's less than Mitt Romney's 226. That's consequential in a straight-ticket country, in a House of Representatives, and the Republican brand may be very low in wake of this sort of thing, but the shutdown. But that structural advantage, Obama's numbers have gone down too, and the Democrats, and that structural advantage at the Congress and legislative is a source of strength for Republicans if they can find intelligent candidates that have good natural political instincts, as they've had some difficulty doing, and if they can find Senate candidates and House candidates who don't disqualify themselves as being slightly a wacko.
Jonah, brief response, and then we're going to take one last question and see if we can get back on time.
Very quickly, Michael makes a point I just want to emphasize. You know, Edmund Burke, the founder of modern conservatism, says, "Example is the school of mankind, and he will learn it no other." And what he means by that is that sometimes you have to show people things. You can't just tell people things. And part of this has to do with the long argument I make about how Republicans need to become better storytellers. Reagan was a master storyteller. We shouted things about first principles, but we don't tell people stories as much as we used to. But the point is that you don't get a Ronald Reagan if you don't have the failures of Jimmy Carter, and probably the failures of the 1970s generally. The opportunity for leadership is presenting itself in the failures of liberalism, right? We were told that this was going to be a new progressive era, a new Deal. But it turns out conservatism, according to the polls, has become more popular since Obama has been president. Republicans less popular, conservatism more popular. Now, and so I think the person who explained this best was Ed Koch. When he was voted out of office as mayor of New York City, he was asked if he was ever going to run again, and he said, "No. The people of New York fired me, and now they must be punished." And we are now in a situation where the people of America have voted for Barack Obama. They put all of their chips on Obamacare. It doesn't look like it's going well. The economy has not done what we were promised it was going to do. And these create ripe opportunities for the right kind of Republican leader to fill in the void and seem like he has a rendezvous with destiny.
Great. Hear, hear. Organizers, do I have time for one more quick question or no? What's the verdict? Yes, no? Yes, sir?
It just better be really good.
Very brief.
Well,
Yes.
on that note, Mr. Goldberg, who can do that? Who today? That's
Great question.
Security!
Let me
Jonah.
Yes.
I just want to say one thing, is that who can do that is Ronald Reagan was not Ronald Reagan before Ronald Reagan was Ronald Reagan. In other words, he was not the great president in 1979. Half the party despised him. He was, now is universally beloved, universally respected. So who is out there, I don't know, but whoever is out there is that not going to be you know, going to be held in kind of the same regard Reagan was, or even less, where he's going to have some of the support, some of the people supporting him and other people opposing him. You're going to have to elect them and go through a period of, you know, election and re-election and trial and tribulation before you judge whether or not they are the next Reagan or they're even going to be a great or even acceptable president.
I agree with that entirely. And the same thing was true of Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher became Margaret Thatcher as she did the Margaret Thatcher things, right? And she wasn't, you know, just sort of delivered from Mount Olympus and here humans take Margaret Thatcher. She actually rose to a bunch of challenges.
Well, and if you read Charles Moore's biography, she was also cautious at times, and she delayed fights until she felt she was prepared to win. They took a coal miners' strike and settled with them, and they accumulated the piles of coal they needed to get through the winter and get the alternative fuel sources. So she picked her fights and her timing more carefully than her rhetoric after she left office might lead you to suspect. And I think Craig would probably agree that Reagan as president is not always quite the fighter that we sometimes think. He acts tactically, he makes occasional withdrawals and returns.
But that raises the point I just want to make real quick, is that for all of the talk about how we need another Ronald Reagan, we need this guy who's principled, this guy who's stuck to his guns and all of that, that's all true. Reagan was principled, he stuck to his guns, but he also made concessions. You know, don't get me wrong, you know, who loves what has two thumbs and loves Ronald Reagan? This guy. But what people forget is that Ronald Reagan was also a really good politician.
He's a superb politician.
And we have put so much conviction, so much importance on checklisting the right principles without checklisting, is he a good politician? And that gets to the persuasion question. And the Republican Party needs some really good politicians.
But let me just say, is that none of us is endorsing Chris Matthews' book.
Well, Chris, we need good politicians. They're hard to find. You can make an argument there were no good natural politicians in the 2012 Republican field. We'll see. But, you know, H.L. Mencken, you know, people can make misjudgments. Speaking of Franklin Roosevelt, H.L. Mencken referred to him as Roosevelt Minor in comparison to his cousin. And Walter Lippmann, the great shrewd journalist of the day, said that Franklin Roosevelt is a pleasant man who, without having any important qualifications for the office, would very much like to be president. So this is a rolling story, and we need to keep learning more.
Take over. Thank you.